All right, ladies and gents, that was Vinay, and he was talking about his newest pet project, Rapid React, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Then I urge all of you to go and give it a shot. Maybe it's like he said, it's going to save you a day's work. Uh, Anyway, so moving on towards the last speaker of the day, and this is the final talk that we have for this event. We have Aditya Jamuar, who is going to be talking about building a form library for React, which is quite interesting. So let's have Aditya with us. There
Hi,
he
hi,
is.
Dick.
Hi, Aditya. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. What about you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing great. I see that you're in office at the moment.
Yeah,
Wonderful. I was hoping you'd be at home, but it's good to see that as well.
yeah. Better internet.
And Eh, Well, that's true. That's true. So, as a quick introduction for Aditya, he's been a software developer with GeekyAnts for almost 2 years now, and he likes to read and learn random historical facts and stories. I mean, it must be
Yeah,
fun to gather all of this information, which you would rarely get to use. But I mean,
true, true
there's a
that.
separate thrill to that.
Yeah. Well, I'm just waiting for my moment, I guess.
Well, maybe you are. So here's I'll give you a moment. So, what's the most recent strange historical fact that you came across?
Well, I was reading up on Indus Valley for a while, and there's this new site called Raki Gadi that was discovered in around 2018, and it has
Okay.
a lot of controversy going around with it. And there's a DNA sample that we got. So there's a lot of cool things going on in the archaeological side of India. So I really encourage you guys to go check it out. It's really fun.
Well, there's another side of Aditya that you did not know of, everybody. So there you go. Anyway, Aditya, I'm going to let you take the stage and all the best. Take it away.
Thank you. All right, let me just share my screen. And yeah, I hope you can see my screen. I'm just gonna start with my presentation. All right. So today's topic for me is going to be building a form library for React. After all the accessibility stuff and all the cool CLIs that we have seen today, this is a step back, to be honest, because forms are generally the major part of what like internet is made of. Like internet, if you could say, like 10 to 20% of it is just forms. We are just filling forms here and there, and more or less it used to be simpler when you used, like, in back in the time of Laravel. I mean, Laravel is still relevant, but like when it was very like highly used, forms were simpler. I mean, you just had to like validate a request, and it used to like render the UI for you. You didn't have to do much of the like handling that we used to do. But ever since JavaScript and recent frameworks for JavaScript, things have become complicated. We expect more out of forms. We don't just expect forms to be a place where we store data, or where we write our data. We want it to be a place where we validate it as well. And it has to be aesthetically, it has to look good. No, and that has really complicated the form scene, especially in React. So today we are gonna talk about how to build a form library for React. Before that, let me just introduce myself. I'm Aditya. I have been a software developer with GeekyAnts for the past 2 years. I have worked on BuilderX, I've worked on APIBeats, I've worked on a lot of other OSSs, and I hope you'll see more from me in future. All right, let's start with, first of all, why. Before we go towards anything, before we get into building a form library, let's talk about why we need one to begin with, right? So, as I said, forms have become complicated. There's a lot of things going under the hood. There is maybe validation, there is checking if it's dirty or not yet. So are quite a few logic. Just to show you how complicated it has become, let me just take you to a basic code sandbox that I made. So this is just an input. It doesn't have any validation so far. All right. This works, more or less. This works, but there's a slight issue with it. It doesn't validate. So if I were to write this and I were to submit, it would work, right? because there's no validation on the front end, and then we have to validate it on the back end, which at this point, at the volume of APIs that is going around, becomes a bit messy. Also, it really deteriorates the overall UX of your application. So let's try to add a basic validation in a normal React way without using any libraries. All right, so this is an input. Let's say we want to have something like an error, which will be by default true because it's currently empty. And let's say when we are changing, we want to say that, okay, if the value is not empty, set error as false, else set it as true. Then set up the value itself. Okay, then let's say we want to have some sort of a error message that shows that, okay, this is still a required field. Once we type, it disappears. When we do remove that, when we clear it, again it shows the error. So now it's working a bit better. Like we have a error, but now we also want to make sure that the first time a user lands into a form, this is not there. This has to come up when it, as a user has focused on it, and then maybe inputted a wrong input, right? So let's put another variable in there. Let's do something like dirty, and then let's say that whenever we are putting a submit, or whenever we are doing an on blur, it turns into a dirty field. All right, let's try it out. Oh yeah, and one last thing. Yeah, so as you can see now, this should work as expected. All right, so this works, right? I mean, ultimately, on a very base level, this is what a form should have: a validation, a dirty, like a check for dirty or not. So this is pretty simple, right? But as you can see, this is a single field. This is a single email field, and we had to have like three states for this, and then we had to like write a lot of custom logic. When you multiply this multiple fields into like 10 or 20 or maybe 30 fields, then it becomes a bit complicated and messy, and your code will start to look really bad, and it becomes hard to maintain, to be honest. So that's why a form library is needed. It handles all these things for you, so you don't have to do this. You just focus on the logic, you just focus on building your business, and the library will work for you, right? So that's what the concept of a form library is. But let's say, why another library, right? I mean, we already have formic, and don't we already have React hook forms? Why do we need a third one, right? I mean, they work pretty well, right? So let's just say recently I was building a form, and some of my forms, since it was more based on the business logic and not on the how the UI should look, I felt that the form library or focuses awfully a lot on UI, which is right because ultimately they are a form library, and form library are UI components, right? But at the same time, there was a concept which basically says UI as an afterthought. So I will like quickly take you to the original article. This was written by Michael Westrate, who is also the creator of Movex. And it's a very good article, to be honest. It's a bit long, but it's like really effective. Some of the key points that he makes here is that ultimately the data is the MVP of your application, right? I mean, he gives a very good metaphor that if tomorrow your inbox.google.com stops working, where do you go? Like what do you call, if you have to call the office itself, what do you ask them? Do you ask them that where my plus button is, or what the validation are, or do you just ask what my mails are? And ultimately that's what matters in your application. UI certainly helps with your application, but it is not the business logic of your application. So but somehow React and Vue and all these amazing front-end libraries seem to like take our focus away from there, right? And that's what the problem, that's where the problem becomes comes like we are awfully mixing, like coupling our states, our local states with the data logic, and it becomes really messy at the end of the day. It becomes hard to maintain it. We don't know where what goes. And when you add these form libraries into the mix, which are ultimately UI first components, it becomes a bit more messy, right? So I mean, he also added that always try to do something like a model first, model data, like try to model data first. That is, if your application was accessible, even if you were building it for CLI, that's the ideal build for the application. And when we look at the current form library solutions, that is somewhere missing. We model our UI first, and then we build our data, then we plug our data into it. So there's another quote that he says, which is written in the like article. It says, React is to me like a CLI library, a tool that helps to capture user input, fire off processes, and to transform business data into a nice output. It's a library to build user interfaces, not business processes. That's something to live by when developing for React. And so this is the exact principle that influences. This is what we thought ideal libraries should be built upon, right? So, and you know what? There's a very famous library that's built upon this very idea. That is the MobX and MobX state tree itself. So let me just give you a brief about what they are. All right. So MST ultimately is built upon models. Okay, a model can have another model itself. That model can be used to create an instance of that particular model. So this is like a class and an object structure, a basic object-oriented programming. Then this instance can be plugged into an UI and everything will start working on its own, right? So everything is working out at this point. What now I want you to focus on this model itself. Okay, this model allows us to extend it. That means if the model A has some properties, you can extend it and add more properties on top of it. So since this seems to work and this is something that goes with our what our goal philosophy is, let's use this. All right. So, all right. Okay. So, a form model, we can build a form model, which in itself can have another form model, and it can have something like functionalities and APIs. And so, this is what will be trying to build ultimately. Okay. But since I already built a POC, I would like to show it to you in action first. All right. So, this is a basic setup that we're using. So what I want is I want a model that basically just takes the initial input, and then I define what it should do on submit, and then I maybe pass the instance using some provider, and then I'll just use something like a field, or maybe not even as a field, maybe something like a handle change or a handle blur, and it should of automatically like work. We don't shouldn't have to do anything of that sort. And since this itself is a MST model on its own, we can do whatever we want, just like we would with MST, any other MST models. We can add functionalities, we can add middlewares. It becomes a lot simpler. So ultimately, this is what we try to build. Okay, this is something like, and maybe we can add more things like some pre-written validations, or maybe we can write more functions that can basically validate it on the fly. So this is what like a library built on this philosophy can do, because it's ultimately creating a um, instance out of a model which is already a MST model. So let's see how we did this, how this POC was built. So let me take you to the code itself. So what we are doing ultimately is we are creating a model. We are creating a model which has some volatile properties like submitting and touched. These are standard things that are used in every form library. We have other views like is submitting, errors, Maybe we have other things like is valid, get form data, and we have some actions that we have defined, which is again extensible because it's an MST model. So we have something like on submit, handle submit, set all touched, handle change, handle blur, set value. Once all these things come together, we have some other things like error message. Error message in itself has other values inside it, and so this can read from directly from the provider, so you don't have to do something extra. And at the end, when you are plugging everything in, you can just simply plug any UI library to it. So you can basically, you're ultimately building a data model on one side and you're creating UI on the other another, and these two are totally independent of each other. And then we are just plugging it in, just like we would with something like on change or maybe just field, and it's just starts working. That is what an idle form library should do, right? So I think this is what we have built. So we did a POC. We were doing this POC for a project, and when we thought we can probably wrap this all into a nice library, and you will be hearing about that library pretty soon. We'll be announcing it once we are done with all the small polishing that needs to be done, and you should definitely check it out. I think that's all, folks. Over to you, Digvijay.
Well, that was short and sweet, Aditya.
Yeah,
You can hear me, right?
yeah, I can.
All right, perfect. So, thank you so much for your talk. It was really informative and rather sweet and short, I should say. We do have a few questions for you from our viewers. Aditya wants to ask if it's suitable for multi page forms.
Yeah, actually it is. I am not sure if I have it running, but okay. So since it's built over a Movex state tree, right? It's a model. So as you know, models can have models inside it, nested inside it. So we try to implement it just like that. We just you just pass instances into it, and it will just start working in itself. Like it's a form inside a form kind of concept. And since there's a get form value component on the root level, you can just use that and you can get a JSON out of it, just like you would with get snapshot of a Movex object.
All right. Well, I hope that answers your question, Aditya, from Aditya. We have another question from Ananya. So, can we implement auto form completion with this?
I think since again we are allowing extensibility with it, so you can pretty much implement anything you want. Again, it's not at all very restrictive. You API, you can plug it in with anything. You just have to provide it with handle change, handle blur, and it should start working with whatever you're building. That was our entire concept. Build UI
Mm.
and build data layers separately so that it's easy to plug it in. I mean, we shouldn't have to worry too much about just one thing and then try to couple it with something another, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Right. Okay. I hope that answers your question, Nanya. Aditya has a follow-up question to the one that he asked before about multi-page forms. So, wants to know if the state would be preserved over page routing.
So we have tried it out. Again, it doesn't come in the package itself, but I mean, it's possible because we have experimented with it. We have experimented with it even in a Next.js application, which re-renders the entire page from the server itself, and it works. I mean,
Hmm.
since this is ultimately a Movex state tree, so if you put it in a native like your main tree, it's doable. If you save it in a local storage and then retrieve it, it's doable. Like there are multiple ways to do that as well, and it's pretty
Hmm.
simple. We have tried it out, and it was really easy for us to build.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. Well, I hope that answers your question again, Aditya. So, with that, I think that's all the questions we have at the moment for you. So, of course, if you guys have any other questions that you might want to ask our speakers, you can always connect with them on Twitter and LinkedIn. All of their Twitter accounts are mentioned in the description down below, so you can just check them out. And thank you so much, Aditya. I would love for you to be here since we are at the end of the event.